Welkom, welkom. Hoorbaar? Niet hoorbaar, iets hoor. De man is bezig. Check, 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 1, 2. Ik zal een liedje zingen. Beter? Oké, ja. Ja. Okay, welcome everybody to our case study. It's from Parkwind. We will do an offshore wind farm case study. My name is Bart van Uden. I am the OT coordinator at Parkwind. I joined the wind energy sector in 2006, and during those years I gained a lot of experience in wind turbines and wind farm SCADA controls. Yeah. Also joining today is Tijl Deneut from EBO Enterprises. He's the team lead of the security engineers, also certified ethical hacker and senior OT security invalid. Also joining is Thomas Heyman from Toreon as principal consultant. He is our OT security advisor and also CISO. Good. Our case study today, we are talking about offshore wind farms. So allow me to introduce Parkwind. Parkwind is a dynamic, independent green power company. Currently in Belgium, we manage 4 wind farms at the Belgian North Sea, and this is connected to the grids, high voltage grids. So this is the offshore wind farm, and this is an offshore high voltage station. So the Belgian wind farms we have in our portfolio, plus 1 in Germany. It's in the Baltic Sea. That's also an operational wind farm. Furthermore, we have new projects in the pipeline, but they are, it's not a subject for the case study today. Good, let's dive into an offshore wind farm. So on the left-hand side, we have the onshore part. Who is connecting to all the components? For sure, the O&M, operations management engineers, they oversee the systems. So they connect to all the systems we have available. This is coming to an onshore substation where a TSO is for Belgium it's ELIA, which is regulating the grids. We have PPAs, that is an ENGIE or Luminous, so they are the off-takers of the power. Possibly we have a BRP, so a balancing responsible party. And then we go to the right-hand side. Here we have the high voltage substation or OSS, where the turbines are connected. Yeah. This schematic is quite general. In reality, we have way more subcontractors connecting to the turbines, to extra sensors, to extra devices. Yeah. But just to show, a lot of components are talking in bits and bytes to each other. Yeah. Good. The cybersecurity risk is increasing. Back in the day, in the 90s, it was quite easy with a low risk and basic automation. Shifting to multiple plants, they are interconnected and they have remote management. The remote management increases the risks. Yeah? We go nowadays, if we check the power plants, everything is connected. Everything is under pressure, so this exposes us to higher risks. The who stays the same. So who is operating and checking this? We have the OEMs and the O&M engineers that connect. Only difference is with nowadays the end users. Here we can think of PV installations of our grandparents even. So all the small installations are also connected to the grid. To show that the cybersecurity risks are not only an academic problem, but also a real problem. We have some recent and relevant hacks and exploits and so on that happened. So an ICS had malware. Here, for example, this is in Nordex as a wind turbine manufacturer. They got hacked. Enercon, also a wind turbine supplier, their communication system got hacked with satellites. Vestas, a very well-known manufacturer, they had data leakage. Also an important component in the high voltage network is an RTU. So Hitachi, they also have a CVE alerted. Just to show it is a real thing, it is happening, we have attacks. how to protect us against those things. Therefore, I will give the word to Thomas Antel.
Thanks. So as Bart just mentioned, the fact that OT in general and offshore wind in particular are under attack, it's a real threat. It's not an academic thing. An obvious question would be, especially for those of you in the room that maybe aren't familiar with OT or industrial environments, would be like, yeah, but IT security, right? There are solutions for that. Why don't we just fix it? How can it be so hard? Well, if you're not from an OT background, one thing that you might not appreciate sufficiently is that OT is a completely different branch of the evolutionary tree, so to speak, than IT. It's an environment that has to deal with very different requirements than a classical IT environment. Case in point, the number one priority in many cases with IT is confidentiality of information, right? If you look at a wind farm, confidentiality of data, Bart, I don't think that's even on your top 10 list of priorities. It's all about integrity and availability of the wind turbines and the supporting systems. Another differentiator, legacy systems, right? I mean, okay, in IT environments, you also have a legacy application here or there, or a server that needs to be upgraded. But the average life expectancy of a wind turbine is 25 plus years, right? You have to deal with systems of which maybe the manufacturer went out of business 10 years ago. That's a fact of life. It's not the exception. So it's a real problem. It's a hard problem to solve because you can't just give it to the IT security team. Unfortunately, it's also a more or less time-critical problem to solve. I'm sure many of you already are aware that there is such a thing as the NIS, the NIS and the NIS2 directive. So even the EU came to the conclusion that this was important enough to not just create legislation, but then create new legislation, which will come into effect later this year, which basically forces across the EU operators of essential services, like Parkwind, to step up their cybersecurity maturity, right? The burden of proof that they did their work well enough and that they took up the responsibility to protect, in this case, the wind farm assets, is on them. Also important to know that in this legislation, there is a strong focus not just on protecting your critical assets, but just assume it's a fact of life, everyone will get hacked sooner or later. That by itself is not the end of the world, as long as you can detect when things go wrong and that everyone knows how to respond to these security incidents. So incident response and business continuity are made very explicit in this new legislation. So in my experience, before you start addressing this problem, which is a hard problem to solve, the number one fallacy is that you treat it as a classical technological problem. Do not do this. In order to solve this structurally, you will need time, resources, tools, people, and a lot of willingness of your colleagues to help out, right? In other words, this is a business problem that you need to solve. If you cannot convince management that it is in their best interest, in the interest of the business, to address this, and it's not just a techie in a corner of the company that is making a lot of noise because they read a blog post somewhere, if you cannot do that, you will never succeed. And I think this is also something that we saw, for instance, in our own context too. The moment that we realized, now we're getting somewhere, is the moment that we weren't trying to push management to do stuff, but the moment that management started to ask us, hey, Bart, that OT security thing, how is it going? Are we there yet? Come on, can you come and present something to the next management meeting? Then you know that you're starting to get their attention, right? So what do you need? A business case. What should be in that business case? A high-level strategy that relates to the business requirements, the needs of your customers, of the regulator, and so on and so forth, which explicitly takes into account all these intricacies of an OT environment. And of course, you need resources. One important remark there, you need time, you need a budget, you need tools, and so on, you need people. But one thing that you cannot underestimate is that you need OT-specific skills and knowledge. And especially today, because there is NIS2 and everyone is quickly trying to catch up, finding those resources is not always easy. So we only have half an hour, but I just very high level wanted to give you some insights on how I would approach or suggest that you approach creating such a strategy. We'll start from some assumptions. One, I'm assuming that we want something that lasts, not just a band-aid. Two, I'm going to assume that we don't know all of our OT assets or the full size of the problem yet. For those of you in the audience that think, but I don't even know what I'm trying to protect, it's not just you. This is a universal problem. Make it explicit, face your fears. It's the only way that you're going to fix it. Three, we're going to assume that there will be legacy and unmanaged systems, and if we're not careful, it's OT, things will break. So you should always start your strategy from establishing roles and responsibilities and goals and discuss them with management and how far management wants to go. What is the risk appetite? Based on that, you can analyze where you are, design a high-level architecture, involve the right suppliers and the right tools, and so on and so forth. I want to make two observations here. Number one, selecting the right suppliers and tools is super important, but in my experience, you can only do this after this step. If you do not have a high-level understanding of where you want to go as a company, you can invite as many suppliers and buy as many tools as you want. It's not always going to make your life easier. The opposite might be true, right? So please start from a high-level plan. And number two, I also get a lot of questions. Yeah, but what about an ISO certification? Should we get certified? Well, it can't hurt. You don't have to for the legislator or for NIS2. But the way that I would suggest that you can think about is, if you've done this entire journey, if you arrive at this point, getting certified is just a cherry on top. It's not going to cost a lot of additional effort. So don't think about getting certified. This is probably just going to be the natural evolution once you arrive at this point. Know that there are existing standards and frameworks that not only can help you and advise you on how to proceed, but can help you communicate with suppliers in a more structural way. So this is all easy from my perspective. I'm not now going to give the word to an expert that can actually tell you how to do it in real life.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So hello everyone, so I'm Tijl from IBU. I'm a tech guy, so legislation and regulation and strategy is very important, but at a certain point you actually have to do something, you have to implement something, you have to be technical. Thank you, happy to oblige. And that's where we come in. No, it's to be fair. So what I have brought with me is a general how a network looks like or might look like in a general form, right? So this is not a particular network that we see here. And almost automatically you have like these different what we call levels. It's not segmentation, it's not VLANs. So you have these little numbers to the right side. These are numbers from something called the Purdue model, which is a part of a standard of the IEC 62443. And these actually define how you use these devices in that single level. So level 0, for example, are just sensors, actuators in an industrial environment that have no network capability and things like that. And then you have different layers on top of that. Now, when you start to provide or to look for security of an industrial environment, you quickly have some issues there, because how do you protect and monitor something that in certain cases you're not even allowed to touch? It's not yours. It's something that you have bought or rented, and it's in your environment, it's in your factory, and they have to get access remotely to monitor and troubleshoot stuff, and you cannot even log into it at certain points, or you're afraid to touch it because it's legacy, very old. And how do you protect it? How do you make it visible what it is doing on your environment? So, and that's what this slide is over. It's on the network level. For me, this is actually what makes an industrial security operations center an industrial one. So what I do here, what I mean here is actually this little device. It takes a copy of all the packets inside that network that pass on this. It's a switch, so it's a device that is meant to copy packets. Actually, that's what it does. It's the main focus of the device. But it makes an extra copy and sends all these packets to one single device. It is extremely important, in my vision at least, that this is a read-only copy. I do not want the medicine for security to be worse than the disease. Right? You want to have a visibility without impacting your precious industrial environment, without impacting the availability and the latency and things like that. Your production comes first, always, in any case, especially in wind farms, of course. So what this does is actually taking in a copy, a read-only copy, and then doing his magic and analysis on that network traffic. And it creates a baseline. It looks at everything that is happening there, at your variables, at your industrial protocols, who is speaking to whom, what they are saying between each other, how often do they speak to each other, and especially if you have that certain baseline, what deviates from that baseline. Not only in who speaks to who, but who should speak to who. So firewall rules can be checked with this kind of context. What is going to the internet, coming from the internet, even from within the lower levels of your industrial environment, those kind of things. It's if you know how to use it, and then this is of course a human factor. If you know how to use this, it has a lot of benefits, a lot of upsides, and it's extremely important to have that visibility to start enhancing and developing your security strategy, right? So it has a lot of upsides, especially in industrial environment, easy adoption, because it's read-only. It has no power to change your network. And for starters, that's a good one, because you also have to convince your plant manager, your OM manager, things like that. And they are a bit skeptic if you want to introduce new packets or new devices, right? So network monitoring. Of course, that's not the only side of this. Network monitoring, as a lot of other tools, of course, generates logs, generates stuff, alerts, things like that. And then you have your host level as well that you also want to protect. Here we have the downside in industrial environments that this is a very broad level of hosts. You have old Windows systems. Windows XP is not uncommon in these kind of environments. Old Linux systems and old other systems as well. You do not always have the option to install agents, but if you do, you have a lot of choices here. What we see here is actually the MITRE attack framework, right? So the different techniques, tactics, protocols that they use to move around in your network to do evil stuff, right? And you see which kind of installation covers them all. And what you want is, of course, one that goes as broad as possible. The most common one you might know is antivirus, for example. That's, in technical terms, an endpoint protection platform. That's the bottom one, EPP. So he only covers a couple things, right? SIEM I will mention later, also very interesting, of course. But what we have chosen to install on an industrial level, the choice that we made is XDR, which means extended detect and response, right? You want detect, but in certain cases on host level, not on network level, but in host level, you also want some response. If it's 100% sure a virus, you don't want to have that alert and someone looking at it. You want to stop the virus if you're 100% sure that it is a virus or a phishing website or something like that. So the XDR is actually something that covers the entire line. And it's actually the base for us for the SIEM. So we have a security, information, and event monitoring tool. That's what this is what this stands for, of course. And what the SIEM is actually a must. A legal must for NIS2 Europe-wide, which, by the way, has been approved and supplied in Belgium now. So SIEM is a must, because what the SIEM actually does is it correlates, it collects all the event logs, all the monitoring, all the information from the different points that you have. If you have networking level protection, host level protection, you have firewalls that produce logs, often forgotten. You have vCenter virtualization software that produces logs. You might have Office 365 that has a lot of logs that are forgotten. You want to automate that a little bit and then have a human look at it. So that's what a SIEM actually does for you. It collects all these logs in a safe and secure way, of course, and then performs its correlation on top of that. So it's the central point. That's what this actually stands for. And then, of course, you want to put it all together. So what do we have? We have actually, like an onion, we have our layered security, right? So something called defense in depth as well. Because still, some people say we have antivirus, so we don't need a firewall. We have a proper up-to-date system, so we don't need backups. That's of course not the case. You want to have all these options, preferably as most as possible. You start a little bit from your OT assets. One of the first thing that comes to mind maybe then is your host protection, which is, depending on the OT asset, not something that you might directly install on the OT asset. If it's a PLC or an RTU, it's hard to install that. But it is still extremely useful because usually if something happens to your OT asset, it comes from an IT asset. It comes from laptop, engineering workstation, a MacBook, an iPhone. It happens. So if you have that agent installed there, it can already be stopped before it even reaches your OT asset, which is of course also very interesting. Of course, if it is something that is not under your control, suppliers, maintenance people, they come onto your network, they have to perform maintenance on your devices, then host protection is not always an option. You have to rely on whatever host protection they have or not have. So then you need your network protection. That can help to identify in the first place what is happening to your OT asset. If you combine them, you correlate the logs into a SIEM, of course, where everything comes together, where we have built our SOC on top of that. And of course, also very important, you have your legislation, your standards that you can use to not forget anything. For example, ISO 27001, which would be a certification that brings it all together. So that's defense in depth for you. Okay. So for this is actually the wrap-up slides. I think you had something to say, or I have no idea about the timing.
I think we're good. So wrapping up, I think most of it has been said already. For those of you, I don't know if there are many people in the room that are actually facing OT problems. They have OT that they need to manage and secure, and they might have, maybe already for a while, a slightly uncomfortable feeling. Yeah, I know we have this problem and I know we have to deal with it, but maybe next year, maybe when we have some time or some budget. That time is never going to arrive. So if you have this problem and you need to do something about it, I think the best time was probably last year. The next best time is starting today. If you do, please don't treat it as a purely technical problem. Also, do not treat it as a classical IT security problem, because it isn't. There are other requirements and it's only going to lead to frustration for yourself and your colleagues. There are some very good relevant standards, frameworks, tools that you can buy today or adopt today to help you. Don't reinvent the wheel. And then last but not least, of course, involve the right partners. I mean, there aren't a lot of companies that, especially if you already have a dedicated OT capability or OT team, that's already maybe the minority, let alone if you have a dedicated OT security capability within your organization, that's going to be the exception. The good news is you don't have to do it alone, and there are, of course, parties that are willing to support you in that. Are there any questions from anyone? For either one, eh?
The XDR solution for OT, isn't it a bit tricky? You don't want in production to shut down the production automatically. Is it just reporting it or actively shutting down?
Thank you for the question. It was a perfect question. It gives me a chance to tell a little bit of how we approach it. So the question was about XDR on industrial assets and endpoints. If you have automatic response there, it is an issue. It is a risk that you don't want. You don't want your SCADA or your engineering workstation or your historian being isolated because it thinks that someone is performing a brute force attack. Instead, someone forgot his PIN code or something like that. What we have created is different profiles, and we attach them to the Purdue level. And the lower you go in the Purdue level, the less active it becomes, the less responsive. It keeps on alerting, of course, 4 minutes, yes, thank you. It keeps alerting, of course, but the less active and also the less logs it might collect over the network, because sometimes these devices also are not so competitive. They have less RAM, they have less CPU, things like that. So these are all dials and tweaks that we can set, but by default, we have IT and OT as well. If that is a checkbox, if it is OT, never response on that. So if the endpoint is classified as an OT one, monitoring only. It also has a learning period where it also only does monitoring even on IT. After that, for IT, we switch to DR, XDR, and the other sides we switch to just detect. But yeah, so that's a good question.
Hello, thanks for the talk. Small question, is it dedicated to the windmill use case, or is the solution maybe also usable in other contexts?
We developed it as an industrial SOC for all industrial environments. Of course, every environment is a little bit different. That is surely the case. But we didn't develop it for wind farms. It's developed for everything that has PLCs, RTUs, that can actually tie a little bit into that Purdue network layout that we just saw. If there are historians, if there are critical infrastructure, that's why what we developed it for. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for your attention, and see you later.